This is Maple Blues.
Welcome to the Maple Blues Podcast, the podcast where we talk about the NHL, the St. Louis Blues, the Toronto Maple Leafs, and other things hockey. It's episode 3, and I think you could guess what we're talking about today. We are talking about the aftermath of the trade deadline, and this is probably has been the biggest trade deadline since a while. I can't remember the last time there was a big trade deadline with a bunch of wheeling and dealing. So with that, let's talk about probably the big fish of the trade deadline, Mikko Rantanen to the Dallas Stars. So for those of you who did not know, Mikko Rantanen previously was on the Hurricanes that had been traded from Colorado, and only 13 games later, he gets traded to the Dallas Stars for Logan Stankoven, a conditional first-round pick in 2026, a conditional first-round pick in 2028, a third-round pick in 2026, and a third-round pick in 2027. And both of those first-round picks are top 10 protected, meaning that, if I'm correct, if the Stars were to slump and be in the draft lottery, if it's a top 10 pick, they're both protected and go to the Dallas Stars instead of the Hurricanes. The main reason we also want to highlight this is because if you just heard, there was a report from someone that Rod Brindamore said Mikko Rantanen only wanted to play for 4 teams and the Hurricanes weren't one of them, so that just adds more to the drama. And yeah, something to talk about. Charlie, what are your thoughts?
This is easily the thing that all hockey fans have been talking about following the trade deadline. I mean, it's not the only thing, but it is definitely the biggest. We got like back-to-back blockbuster trades. I mean, it's definitely no Luka Doncic to the Lakers situation, but I'd say it's pretty up there for talking purely in the space for hockey. And from what I've heard, just, reading online and seeing hockey fans interact with each other, a large group of Avalanche fans are actually planning to boo Mikko Rantanen when he makes his return to Denver. There's always a bit of exciting drama whenever fans are planning to boo former players, so yeah, it's definitely on the minds of a lot of hockey fans right now.
I don't want to say I'm not shocked that Colorado fans are booing Rantanen, but I can't entirely be shocked. And the trade itself is pretty crazy that Rantanen went from one contender to another, and the fact that it happened in the same year is just crazy enough. I think it could actually be kind of like the Luka trade, but it kind of reminds me a bit more of like a chopped up version of the Eric Lindros trade in some way.
Yeah, you're spot on about that. I was actually going to say the same thing. That really comes to mind. And I'll tell you what, there is a decent chance that Dallas and Colorado face each other in the playoffs. Actually, let me pull up the standings. So, at the time of recording, we have the Dallas Stars in second in the Central at 42-20-2 for 86 points, and the Colorado Avalanche in third in the Central at 38-24-2, good for 78 points. So as things stand, it is looking like the Dallas Stars and the Colorado Avalanche are on a collision course for yet another playoffs battle between these Central Division titans. This trade just made that potential first-round series so much more interesting. I don't want to speak too soon, but I very well think this could be the series to watch in the first round of the playoffs.
I mean, to me, even though I'm terrible at predictions, if I'm using my gut feeling, which apparently has been pretty good to me in the past, I think Mikko Rantanen on the Stars gives Dallas a better advantage. I mean, Colorado, yes, they have McKinnon, but I've noticed for the past few years their seasons all blend into each other. They start out, they struggle, everyone gets injured, everyone thinks, oh, the Avalanche are done, everyone gets healthy, the media goes, oh my goodness, they're going to the Cup final this year. Repeat, it gets annoying. So I feel like Dallas has the advantage over Colorado, mainly in terms of the type of talent, and because I know McKinnon is still good, but I need to check how old he is. McKinnon is currently 29, so he's in the middle of his prime, but I feel like he only has a handful of good years left, and at some point he's going to start declining. At least I think he is. So I feel like Dallas has a bit of a younger core is going to have a better chance against Colorado.
Well, I'll tell you one thing. I am excited for that playoff series. I hope it happens. I really hope it happens, if you can't tell by the tone of my voice. That's like things just got really interesting in the Central. It is going to be a dogfight, especially in the Western Conference, to see who comes out. And that is going to be very exciting. I'm excited to talk a bit more about that when the time comes, but moving on a bit here, we got to talk about Brad Marchand going from the Boston Bruins to the Florida Panthers. Now, I just got to say here, Marchand has for a long time been that player that everyone hates. He's nicknamed the Rat, which is fitting because he now plays for a team where the fans throw rats on the ice. And the Florida Panthers and the Boston Bruins have basically been on opposite trajectories for the past, I'd say, decade or so now. You have the Bruins, who have just been terrorizing the Eastern Conference and have been a force to be reckoned with for many, many years. And the Florida Panthers, who up until recently were largely irrelevant. Irrelevant to the point where no one even bothered hating on them because no one thought of them. But now, you're sort of seeing a turning point. Now, it's no secret that the Florida Panthers beat the Boston Bruins in the playoffs in 2023, which was just completely unbelievable, and again in 2024 en route to winning the Stanley Cup. And now they're starting to take the Bruins' old reputation as being the dirty team that everyone hates. So we are seeing a serious turning point and shifting of the power dynamic in the Atlantic Division. And let me tell you, we've got a Panthers team with Tkachuk, with Marchand, with Bobrovsky. I think they're in a very good position to make another run to the Stanley Cup Finals.
I think Florida has another shot too to defend their title, although with Boston, I'm starting to think that first series against Florida kind of broke them. Winning 65 games and then blowing a 3-1 series lead when Florida was dead. I think that might have broke them. Except that yes, they did win that series against your team after nearly blowing a 3-1 series lead, but besides that, they have been kind of iffy. I mean, they did fire Jim Montgomery, thanks Boston, and they've been kind of mediocre, but I'll be honest, the Brad Marchand trade for me came out of nowhere. I did not think he was going to get traded, and I was on a field trip on Friday actually, so I did not get to see it. Wasn't on social media at all. So it was only at lunch when I saw that the trade happened. Or not at lunch, the trade actually happened around 2 o'clock, so school was just about done, but it was still big that the trade happened, and the fact that Florida got him for only a conditional second-round pick in 2027 is big. It also makes me wonder, what is the future for the Bruins like, since Marchand is gone, and they still have a bit of a leadership void, because remember, Bergeron and Krejci, they both retired recently. It's not too long since Chara and Rask both left, so I think Boston might be in a rebuild for the first time in forever.
Well, I'll tell you one thing. Those of us who cheer for Atlantic Division teams are happy to see this, and this is not going to be good for the Boston Bruins organization because they are a franchise that does not accept losing. They don't like having to tank. Well, obviously no team does, but they especially won't like this. Especially since they really believe they had more gas left in the tank. They signed Swayman on the offseason, and he's been kinda hit or miss, but yeah, he's signed to a big contract, and now Marchand's gone, and I think we're going to start seeing them struggle a bit here in the next few years, and it is just absolutely crazy seeing one of the titans of the NHL for the past decade or so falling.
Yeah, as a Blues fan, I can agree with that, with seeing Boston fail. But yeah, it's going to be very, very weird not seeing the Bruins in the playoffs this year. At least I think they're not going to the playoffs. I could be wrong, but if they do miss the playoffs, which is most likely, it'll be very weird. And yeah, besides the Marchand trade, there were a few other trades we want to talk about. I think the next one I want to talk about involves the Bruins again and your team, Brandon Carlo to the Maple Leafs.
Yeah, this one was not at the forefront of what I was thinking of, and it was definitely not something that I saw coming at all. We gave up Fraser Minton, who more or less was just an AHLer. Like, he spent most of his time with the Leafs organization playing for the Marlies. And we also gave away a 2026 first round draft pick. I think overall, I'd say this was an okay trade. I don't think the Leafs were desperate for a defenseman, but overall, I think this works out well for the Leafs. And I think Brad Treliving did well with this one. I'm definitely okay with this. Not something I saw coming. Carlo was nowhere near my radar, but I think that this worked out well for the team.
And besides the trade, which let's talk about the other big Maple Leafs trade that we were talking about a bit on Friday. Scott Laughton to the Maple Leafs from Philadelphia.
Yeah, so the Leafs wanted Braden Shen, which was pretty well documented and I talked a bit about in the last episode. And when they couldn't get Shen, they pivoted to Scott Laughton. And they gave away Nikita Grabenkin and a conditional first-round pick in the 2027 draft. And I think overall this is another net positive trade for the Leafs, I'd say. I mean, I don't think Laughton's as good as Shen, but like I said, we needed a center, so I'd say the Leafs accomplished their goals going into this trade deadline. And again, overall, I'd give this, I'd say, maybe a B plus to A minus trade deadline for the Maple Leafs. I think we could hopefully start to see offensive production ramp up from here on out, because that's been the Leafs' problem this season. Right when they started getting good goalies, offensive production started slowing down. So, hopefully this changes the trajectory. We definitely needed more depth down the middle, so I think overall, good trade.
I don't know if I mentioned this before on the podcast, but I feel like the reason why the Maple Leafs haven't been scoring more is because it's the Craig Berube system that I saw a bit when he was coaching the Blues. So I feel like that's why he's emphasizing more of a defensive goaltending structure. That's why Wall and Stolar has been pretty good this year. And speaking of the Blues, Braden Shen did not want... I think there was some trade package or something made, but Shen's no trade clause or no movement clause blocked the trade from happening. Because I also heard the Devils were interested, but no trade happened. And speaking of the Blues, I'll talk about what the Blues did in the trade deadline. Nothing. They didn't do anything. Honestly, for me, I think it's the right move since the team has been winning a lot more and they're pushing for a playoff spot. They're only a few points out of a playoff spot. As I've said before, they have started to win consistently, which is good, but they're also going to need some help. They need the Flames to basically lose every game. They need the Canucks to lose every game, and they need Utah to lose every game. And I believe the Flames and the Canucks play each other, so it's not possible for both teams to lose. So, yeah, the Blues are going to need some help. I don't know if the Maple Leafs play one of Utah, Vancouver, or Calgary at some point, but I'm definitely going to need the Maple Leafs to beat them. All of them, they do play them at some point. And, yeah, the Blues are going to need some help in the playoff hunt. Even if the Blues do win all, they have Calgary and Vancouver, I believe, have 2 games in hand, so that will be kind of crucial. That'll be crucial for them later in the stretch. But yeah, the playoff hunt is very fascinating to look at. I'm hoping the Blues can make the playoffs this year. But yeah.
Well, speaking of which, it just so happens, as we are recording this episode, the Leafs and Utah Hockey Club are playing. This is the Leafs' first ever visit to the Delta Center in Salt Lake City. The first just finished up here. So we have the Leafs up 2-0, with the Leafs having 13 shots on goal and Utah having 4. We got goals by William Nylander and Kalle Jarnkrok. Both of those goals were on the power play. As for the other teams you talked about, the Canucks, the Flames, They are not in action tonight, but hey, you should be grateful my Leafs are helping you out as we speak. So, I'm going to talk a little bit about the Edmonton Oilers here. And the Oilers did not do the thing that a lot of their fans have been begging them to do all season, and that was acquiring a goalie. A lot of people are not happy with Stuart Skinner, and I will admit he is probably not the guy the Oilers want going into the playoffs. So who did they get? They got Jake Wallman in exchange for Carl Berglund and a conditional 2026 first-round pick. And I guess it's definitely not a bad thing that the Oilers went out and got a D-man. Like, you know, getting more help on the back end is definitely something that's going to help them. Getting more picks when you're in the middle of a rebuild is probably not the worst thing that could possibly happen. As for Wallman himself, he is more of a offensively minded defenseman, so I think this will help the Oilers, and they're going to need all the help they can get. They have been in a bit of a slump recently, but they're still holding on to that second place spot in the Pacific. We got the Kings, who are breathing down their necks. They are 2 games in hand. They have 2 games in hand over the Edmonton Oilers, with 75 points, just 3 points back of them. So it is going to be a dogfight for that second spot in the Pacific Division. And there is a slight chance that the Golden Knights could fall back. I don't see that happening. But it looks like, once again, for the 4th year in a row, we're going to see the Edmonton Oilers and the Los Angeles Kings in the first round of the playoffs. The LA Kings are going to be desperate and eager to break their losing streak in the playoffs against the Oilers. It's not going to be easy though, but I think goaltending is definitely the Oilers' Achilles, as I've talked about in the past, so who knows. I think the Oilers outmatch the Kings when it comes to offensive production, and I think that just might be too much for the Kings to stop, but who knows. It'll be interesting to see what happens come April.
Yeah, I think we were having connection issues for a second, so I didn't catch all of what you said. But speaking of the Oilers, you were talking about they wanted to get a goalie, and funny enough, the goalie that some people wanted was Jordan Binnington of the St. Louis Blues. So what I did here is that you're right. The Oilers, I don't think they have a chance to go far with Stuart Skinner as their goalie because McDavid and Draisaitl and 1 or 2 other people can't bail out the Oilers in a 7-game series against, say, Vegas or even who else is good this year? I guess maybe they win against LA because it's LA. But if they face Vegas, they might be screwed.
Now, as for those connection issues we were having earlier, thanks to iMovie, the glorious app that it is, I will hopefully have made the transition between topics as smooth as possible for those of you watching on YouTube or listening on Spotify, but that's just the nature of doing one of these things. Sometimes we're going to run into technical difficulties, but it's all good. That's all I have to say about that trade. Is there anything else interesting in trade land that's particularly on your mind?
And there was something I did want to talk about before I had those connection issues. I was talking about the Blues, how they're only a few points out of a playoff spot. As of now, about 10 o'clock Central, 8 o'clock Pacific, the Blues are in 4th. They are 1 point out of a playoff spot. They are tied with the Canucks for 1 point out of a playoff spot. They are 1 point behind the Flames for that final wildcard spot. Currently in their last 10, the Blues are 7-1-2. They did lose their last game to the Kings, but they were down to their best defenseman, and they still got the game to overtime. So I think the Blues still have a chance to make the playoffs this year. But they need to continue to win consistently, and they're going to need some help. They need the Flames, the Canucks, and Utah to lose. The Blues are 3 points ahead of Utah, which is good, but they need to leapfrog the Canucks and Flames. Maybe even try to leapfrog Minnesota, but get into a playoff spot first and then figure the rest out.
This completely slipped my mind, but we would be remiss if we did not talk about Dylan Cousins.
Oh yeah, Dylan Cousins. I did want to talk about him because he was one person we did talk about on the last episode. Yeah, Dylan Cousins and defenseman Dennis Gilbert and a second round pick in 2026 was a acquired from Buffalo for Jacob Bernard Docker and Josh Norris. So I think this trade might help. I think this trade will help Ottawa, since I want to say Ottawa is in a playoff spot. I think they might be in a playoff spot. I'm checking. Yes, they are. They are in the first Eastern wild card right now at 33, 25, and 5 with 71 points. So if the season were to end, they would play Florida in the first round. So I think Ottawa has been one of the big surprises of the season. It would be nice to see them in the playoffs, especially since Melnick is gone and Melnick's not meddling anymore. But yeah, I feel like the Cousins trade is going to help Ottawa. And I don't think they paid as much. They didn't have to give a first round pick or a second round pick, and they got a second round pick back. So I think this might be a good trade for Ottawa.
Yeah, I think, and I've thought this since the trade was announced, the Ottawa Senators won this trade. I think that although Dylan Cousins is having a down year, I think he's going to rebound, and I think it's beneficial in the long run for the Senators to get rid of Josh Norris's contract, and also that 2026 second round pick might prove to be helpful for them. So I think that the Ottawa Senators got the winning end of this trade here.
Looking at other trades on Trade Tracker, I don't know if there's anything else really to talk about. I mean, the Avalanche got Brock Nelson from the Islanders, and Riley Smith is back in Vegas. Oh yeah, Oliver Bjorkstrand and Yanni Gord to the Lightning for 2 first-round picks, a second, and I think a prospect. Because I remember the Lightning GM saying first-round picks aren't that important or something like that. And I mean, I guess it's okay to say if you're competing for cups, which I'm gonna guess Tampa is. Tampa is currently 3rd in the Atlantic. They are 7 points ahead of Ottawa and only 1 point behind Toronto, so will be another rematch if the season ends. That's most likely who Toronto would play in the first round. They would play Tampa. Yeah, I think the trade could help Tampa, but yeah, that's all I gotta say. What are your thoughts?
I'm going to be honest, I was completely oblivious to this trade somehow. Like, I was trying to look at all the trade news, and somehow this one completely did not make it onto my radar. I think, like you said, this will help the Lightning, but I obviously don't like that because they have just been absolutely surging as of late. And when playoff time comes, the Lightning have a reputation for making deep runs, even if they have underwhelming regular seasons. So, yeah, it is going to be paramount that the Leafs finish first in the Atlantic, because the Lightning or the Panthers taking each other out, that's going to be huge. And I guess you could also make the argument that it sort of shows a flaw in the NHL playoffs format, that one of those Titan teams are going to eliminate the other. But, I mean, in this specific instance, I'm not complaining. Yeah, like I said, the Lightning have been surging. They are on pace to pass the Carolina Hurricanes, who are second in the Metro. They have 1 game in hand on them, and they're 2 points back. So, yeah, it looks like the Atlantic suddenly became one of the strongest divisions in the league as of late, and I expect it's going to be like a neck-and-neck fight to the finish between the Leafs, Lightning, and Panthers. Wow, it is going to be interesting to see which one of those 3 teams, because I assume it's going to be one of those 3 that makes it to the conference finals. It's going to be very fun to watch.
I'm looking at standings now, and what would also be funny if Toronto wins the division, Florida goes down to 2nd, Tampa's 3rd, and let's say Ottawa's the first wild card, because I don't think either the Panthers or the Leafs would be catching the Capitals, so the Leafs would be playing the Senators if the Senators stay in the first wild card, so you would not only get the Battle of Florida, but you'd get the Battle of Ontario, which I think unless the season series has proved otherwise, I think the Senators might have a bit of a chance to maybe give the Leafs a scare, but maybe not steal the series. But it would be at least interesting. Hopefully the series would go to 6 or 7, and it would probably be games in Ottawa would be dominated by Leafs fans, as they always are. But yeah, it would be interesting to see 2 in-state or /province rivalries in the first round.
A lot of newer hockey fans don't really remember this, including myself, I guess, but the Leafs and the Senators had a lot of playoffs battles in the early 2000s. They met in the playoffs 4 times, with the Leafs winning all 4 of those series, but I am not confident about the Leafs playing either the Senators or the Blue Jackets for completely irrational reasons that have nothing to do with the players on either team. It's just that the Leafs just have a history of playing down to the Senators and the Blue Jackets, even though in recent years the Leafs have been much better than both of those teams. Whenever the Leafs play them, it seems like they always have like a 45% chance of winning, which is not good. I don't understand how the Leafs consistently manage to beat teams like the Lightning, who are very scary and very strong, but for some reason, whenever they play the Senators or the Blue Jackets, they look like an ECHL team. It's just completely terrible, and I hate it, so I am going to be super nervous if we play either of those teams in the first round. If I had to choose who I would want the Leafs to play in the first round, my personal choice would be the New York Rangers, mostly because, one, it's been a long time since the Leafs and Rangers have met in the playoffs, and two, of all the teams in the Eastern Conference, I would feel the least bad about the Leafs losing to them, but as weird as it sounds, I think the Leafs genuinely have a better chance of beating the Rangers. Well, actually, that's not weird. I think that's pretty rational of an analysis. I think the Leafs would have a better chance of beating the New York Rangers than they would over the Ottawa Senators or the Columbus Blue Jackets, even though they did play well against them, or the Rangers did play well against the Leafs in their most recent meeting. But I'm hoping just for that the Rangers can make a playoffs push down the stretch here.
And, well, when thinking about it with the Blue Jackets, you were nervous about the Blue Jackets. I think in like August or September, it's going to be 5 years since that bubble series where the Leafs laid an egg in Game 5 at home to the Blue Jackets in the qualifiers. So I guess that's might be kind of fresh in your memory as to why you might be scared of playing the Blue Jackets, even though that core is completely different than the one now, except for Merzlikins. I guess Ottawa might just be young, hungry team that catches the Leafs by surprise, or the Leafs choke. Honestly, I think you might be a bit scared if you lose to the Rangers, since, remember, the Rangers were slumping back in November and December and were nowhere near a playoff spot, and now they're only 2 points behind Columbus for that last spot. And Montreal is also not too far, so hey, you never know. Maybe Montreal makes the playoffs.
For me, losing in Ottawa in the first round is like the worst case scenario because their fans are never going to let us hear the end of it if that happens. Like, if we win, I'm not going to make that big of a deal out of it because that's what's expected to happen anyways, but I really do not want to lose to them. And as for the Blue Jackets, another reason why I wouldn't want to play them is because I would hope, after everything that happened in the offseason with Johnny Gaudreau and all that, that maybe they could make a run in the playoffs, Like, I don't want the Leafs to spoil that, but I also don't want the Leafs to be a victim on their path through the playoffs if they decide to go on a miracle run. It would be cool to see them at least go to like round 2 or 3, but I just do not want to be anywhere near Columbus, so I'm really hoping the Rangers make a surge here in the final stretch of the regular season.
And speaking of the Blue Jackets and deep runs, it is most likely, and by most likely I mean all but guaranteed, that they would play the Washington Capitals in the first round. And while I believe everyone would think the Capitals would win, I feel like the Blue Jackets, how resilient they are, they could pull off one of those 2019-esque upsets where the lower seeds upset the higher seeds. It was not too long ago that the Blue Jackets did that against Tampa, and all the division winners were out in the first round. So who knows? Maybe the Blue Jackets could surprise people if they do make the playoffs this year. And yeah, but in terms of the Western Conference, I feel like most of the playoffs are pretty much decided because Winnipeg and Washington are tied. Well, they have the same total points, but in terms of points percentage, Washington is higher. So I believe they are in first. I will double check. Yes, Washington is in first, so they would get the President's Trophy. So Winnipeg is leading the Central, Vegas is leading the Pacific, Washington is leading the Metro, and Florida is leading the Atlantic. So I feel like most of those divisions are kind of locked up. I think the Pacific, yeah, the Oilers, not the Oilers, the Oilers are behind the Golden Knights by 4 points. So I think Vegas might have the Pacific Division locked up, and Winnipeg is way ahead of Dallas, barring a collapse by the Jets. Washington also has a big advantage over the Hurricanes, and we talked about the Panthers and Maple Leafs in the Atlantic. So I feel like most of the division winners are already set in stone, and pretty soon we'll start seeing teams that have clinched and teams that are eliminated. Because if we want to give the bottom feeders some spotlight, San Jose, let me check the league standings again. San Jose is at the bottom, so is Chicago and Nashville. So I feel like at some point later this month, maybe even next week, we could start seeing teams that are eliminated from making the playoffs and some teams that have clinched playoff spots. So that's something to also keep an eye out in the upcoming weeks.
I think the only division in which the team in third has a chance of winning it is the Atlantic. I think the Lightning, with how good they've been recently, still have a reasonable shot at taking it. Nothing is set in stone there. And as for the rest of the league, obviously you have the Capitals now in first in the league, and people are going to bring up the President's Trophy curse. I don't think the President's Trophy curse is a real thing, okay? I mean, yeah, being in first, doesn't guarantee you the cup, but it also doesn't guarantee you're going to get eliminated either. And another thing I wanted to say, last year was a very, very surprisingly predictable playoffs. For the most part, in every series, the team that was higher seeded won, with the exceptions being Colorado over Winnipeg, Edmonton over Vancouver, Edmonton over Dallas, and Florida over New York. But aside from those series, the higher seeded teams won all the series. So because last year's playoffs were surprisingly predictable, I think we're in store for an unpredictable playoffs this year. And I have absolutely no rational reason to think that, but when it comes to predicting the series, when it comes time to do that, I think the smart way to go about things will be to predict whichever team has done well in the last 2 weeks, or maybe last 3 weeks leading up to the playoffs. And also there's going to be injuries for some teams, inevitably, but we'll see when it comes time to make our official predictions, which will be a future episode.
Yeah, and if you're going to talk about President's Trophy, the last time a team won the cup after winning the President's Trophy was the 2013 Blackhawks. However, not many people have brought this up for some reason. That was a lockout-shortened year. If we're going to talk about the Lightning, their cup being a, quote, Mickey Mouse Cup, then you have to put that same asterisk on the 2013 Blackhawks, who did have that record start, but that was merely because they were in the Western Conference. They weren't facing teams who was good in 2013. They weren't facing the Penguins or the Bruins or the Rangers or basically any team that was good in the Eastern Conference in the year 2013. And by 2013, I mean winter-spring of 2013, not the 13-14 season. But yeah, as you said, the President's Trophy means nothing. It's honestly just it's a trophy and a banner you get to raise at your home opener in the next season, but it does not officially mean you are the Stanley Cup champions. That's why we have the Stanley Cup playoffs, to decide who is truly the best team. And of course, the best teams aren't ones that win on paper. They're the ones that actually win when it really matters. That's what makes the Stanley Cup playoffs the best playoffs in all of sports.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I'm with you on that. It is worth saying that the Blackhawks, they were pretty dominant that year. 36 wins out of 48 games is insane. But, like you said, it was a shortened season. They didn't play teams like the Penguins and the Habs and the Bruins. But for what it's worth, that team was solid. I completely agree with you on the NHL playoffs being the best playoffs, especially I hate to be that guy who always compares hockey to basketball, but I think generally the NHL playoffs are better because there's more, I don't want to say randomness, but there are more chances for unexpected things to happen. Whereas in the NBA, usually the unexpected stuff doesn't happen until you're farther into the playoffs. Whereas in hockey, I'd say arguably the most interesting and most fun parts of the playoffs are the first round, those series. Because, just look at 2019. 5 of the series winners out of 8 were lower seeded teams, which is just insane to me. If we're talking about the most predictable year being 2024, then 2019 was the least predictable year. So I think you're absolutely right. I think 2019 is probably the prime example of why the NHL playoffs are as awesome as they are.
And if we want one other, I know this might be getting a bit off topic, but if we want to do other seasons as well, the NFL and MLS, both are mainly single knockouts, so not really much to build tension. And baseball, you'd have less teams that make the playoffs, so there's less chance for real upsets, especially since, well, baseball doesn't have a salary cap. But that's another video to talk about. But the Stanley Cup playoffs have a lot of tension, a lot of build-up, and upsets are prone to happen.
Yeah, like what you said about the other leagues, I completely agree with you on. That's basically how I see it as well. I mean, really nothing compares to the NHL. But anyways, we've talked about all of the important trades that went on. We're looking at a different landscape of the NHL in these last few weeks of the regular season, which has just gone by so fast. So if there's anything else you want to say, I will be obliged to let you say it, but otherwise I think we're just about wrapped up here.
Yeah, nothing really. I guess the one thing I would say is keep an eye on the big teams that we have talked about and see how they have done with their teams between now and the end of the month and whenever we record our next video and probably the end of the season, because those are all good benchmarks to see how those new acquisitions have done with their teams. And to see do we have magic jinxing powers and did we affect them, or how they affect certain teams going to the playoffs. So definitely keep an eye on those. And if anyone is watching this that had a trade that either on my channel, Charlie's channel, or on the Spotify, yeah, that's all I have to say. Charlie, anything else to say?
Nope. I think we're about ready to wrap things up here. So thank you all for watching on YouTube or listening on Spotify. Whatever you're doing, thank you for tuning in to Maple Blues. We enjoy talking about hockey with you guys. Feel free to leave any thoughts or ideas in the comments down below, and we look forward to speaking with you all again once this season gets even more interesting.
Yep, and from me and Charlie, have a good night or morning or afternoon or whatever it is, whatever time you're watching this, and check out our social medias on our link trees, and we'll see you in the next episode. Bye.